Thank you. Good evening. Ron, Nandana, Fadil and rest who's waiting now for this to finish, I'm sure, after 2 tiring days of work, coupled with fun, I heard. I'm out of my comfort zone here. You people have vast knowledge on the subject, and I've been asked to close this session, having been briefed very well, however, by my friend for 15 minutes. So I'm trying to I am trying to do the impossible. So let me try. First of all, the Prime Minister told you that we are working on a Sustainable Development Act. And I was reading, if you don't mind, can you pass me that? I was reading in the newspapers today that Malaysia was also working on a similar, some sort of legislation. And at some point in time, it'll get incorporated into government policy making. I'm proud to show you the draft of the National Policy and Strategy on Sustainable Development Act. So we probably might be the first nation that would incorporate the 17 global goals into development planning. So I think that is an achievement of the present government, and also more than that, the importance that the government gives to sustainable development. It starts out by saying the preamble, whereas the 17 sustainable development goals and 169 associated targets were adopted by the United Nations member states in 2015. It goes on. So we are trying to actually take these 17 global goals and link them based on our local conditions to planning in Sri Lanka. So I think that's taking very seriously what the world leaders have agreed to do in terms of having a sustainable plan going forward. Now, we heard many things being said here, but traditional planning, you say, has a single outcome, and foresighting can have multiple outcomes. Now, I was sort of prepped on this, briefed on this, and we were told about the Malaysian experience of trying to build an aircraft, and as a second option, building airplane or other aircraft components. Now, I was for a short period in the Ministry of Policy Planning, and I asked some of the policy planners, the development planners, why did you really go and put an airport next to a bird sanctuary and spend $250 million doing that? The answer I got was, Mr. Minister, we never really thought about it. We didn't plan it. We did it. We were asked to do it. We did it. Now, the issue is that single outcome, or the single $250 million airport that we have cost us large amounts in taxpayer money to repay the loans for which we have to honor without any purpose. So if it had some sort of foresighting, then perhaps they would have had a plan B and a plan C, and this could have been used for something else or something else. So the decision to store paddy in the warehouses, the hangars, was not an outcome of foresighting, but an ad hoc decision we had to take at the time. what I'm trying to say is that whatever it is that we spend public money on, right? The government or the decision makers must take responsibility in justifying why we are spending that money. The objectives of your workshop, I understand, is to start a national dialogue on the importance of foresighting and innovation to achieve the 2020 development agenda. I think from what I see here, you've already achieved that to an extent. A good start has been made because you see here public sector leaders, private sector leaders, civil society leaders, and others. So we created a nice mix of different groups of people, with different thinking coming together. So real public-private civil society partnership. And I salute you for having made this start. The second objective, you say, is to familiarize development practitioners and development planners with futurist thinking and real-time responsibility to create a development sector that is forward-looking. I think that is good on paper, but familiarize means what? It is just an open-ended input. It's not an output. So I think these objectives might have some output-based something that we can measure at some point. Because it is like saying we had workshops and we had 300 people participating in that workshop. So what is the outcome of that workshop? So I think if we can be more specific and say, look, so many departments, so many ministries come up with some sort of futuristic planning, and I think something like that would be more appropriate. And you say you want to develop an outcome document endorsed by the government of Sri Lanka as a public-private partnership. The mere fact that the Prime Minister participated in this workshop itself goes to show how much of weight he has placed on this exercise. Those who know him know that he is a forward thinker. He is a visionary. He has a long-term view about Sri Lanka. He has a dream for Sri Lanka. So he likes people who can think. He is at home with people who can think outside the box, come up with different ideas, innovations. So I think you sort of started a good partnership. And I think if you continue to show results through this process, then I think you will certainly have a very willing partner in the government of Sri Lanka to carry forward your work. Now, what I hear is that that you want to create a sort of a lab, I was told, sort of a foresighting and innovation lab, which is a public-private partnership to do two things: policy innovation linked to foresight and public service delivery innovation. And you, from what I understand, what you want to do then is to sort of prototype policies prior to being rolled out nationally on the one hand, and make sure in terms of delivery they are citizen-centric, citizen-engaged. And I was listening to Nandana speak earlier about the disabled people or differently abled people. So inclusive policy planning is in the current context something that we seem to have overlooked, and it must be brought back into policy planning. And also the many experts who are participating from many parts of the world is very encouraging. And from what I hear, sharing global knowledge is something that you want to do. Now, I just want to take a few examples. I was given a few examples of Sahana, the post-disaster application, then various proxy indicators for people's behavior, My Foresight Institute in Malaysia, and so on. Let us look at some of the things that has happened locally in the last 6 months or so. A big problem for the government has been the expenditure on subsidies. Not that subsidies are something that needs to be yanked, but subsidies must be targeted. So the whole argument has been for a long period of time that subsidies must be given to the user instead of the supplier. For instance, let's take a complete 180-degree change in the subsidy, the school uniform subsidy. What used to happen was there was billions of rupees spent on school uniforms. And for those who don't know, every kid in this country, whether you're rich or poor, male or female, is entitled for a certain meters of blue, white, whatever material for your dress or for your shirt and trouser. What happened was that it was not properly utilized. Rich people obviously didn't want it. They used it as scrubbers and wash clothes and things like that, or gave them away for various other things. Some of those who needed it got sometimes, most of the time, cheap quality material. And if you went to the warehouses, what you saw was stacks and stacks of unused and sometimes unusable cloth stacked up to the ceiling. Now, how would one solve that problem? Right? So this is where innovation comes in. This is a practical example of policy making. Now, we have a theoretical basis of how subsidies must be granted to those who need. But we have a sort of a legacy and a political hot potato that you cannot disturb the way subsidies are distributed. So how did we do it? The Prime Minister said one day, we'll change it. Instead of giving it to the school, we'll give it to the kid. So how do you do that, sir? No, simple. We just create a voucher and give the voucher to the kid's parent and let her or him collect the coupon, the voucher, go to the store, submit the voucher, purchase the material. If you want to pay more and get more or better quality material, you can do that. Or if you want to get the cheap material, you can do that. But you give the option to the user. So now this is a policy innovation, but we hadn't done any foresighting on this. So we had one outcome, and sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't work. People sometimes called up government officials and used unparliamentary language on parliamentarians and so on. But parliamentarians do it all the time, so it doesn't really matter. But the point being, it worked in some areas, it didn't work in some areas, but we didn't try it out, right? We didn't sort of have a prototype testing of it. But we somehow got it through. And the next year, what I have been telling the Prime Minister and others is that we can actually, instead of the paperwork that needs to be done now, use the mobile phones and transfer the money to the registered parent, and that parent can then go to earmarked sellers of cloth and purchase the required meterage or yardage of that material. So we're working on that. Harin had spoken to you this morning, and it is about digitalizing society, how we can create efficiencies and reduce transaction costs of government services that get implemented. Because whether it is a school teacher or whether it is a government doctor, whether that person delivers the public service that he or she is expected to deliver, no one really knows, and hardly any kind of evaluation of that takes place also. But by using innovative techniques and using electronic means, a lot of these can become less expensive, and the transaction cost of delivery of that service becomes less. If the service is patient care, or the service is the history lesson, right? But delivering the service, the transaction cost of delivering that service sometimes is more than the value of that service. For instance, it was pretty much the case, and it continues to be pretty much the case in most of the subsidy delivery. Now, we've tried that also in fertilizer, but we haven't really succeeded in that. It was a similar thinking. Instead of the fertilizer being the 350 rupee fertilizer, the person, the farmer himself gets the voucher to obtain the fertilizer. So I think these are solutions that will save billions, tens of billions of rupees. So there is value in people looking at, studying these models and coming up with innovative methods of service delivery. In this case, I'm giving you a challenge. For instance, the policy innovation, right? Foresighting, innovating the delivery of fertilizer to the millions of farmers that require the fertilizer, right? So how do you do that subsidy? The government of Sri Lanka for the last so many years has been, bungling this, and the transaction cost of the delivery of fertilizer has sometimes been more, not really, but very high in the past. So those are two things I think that this government innovated, completely changed the way it was being done. Another thing, I was watching the video and you talked about how kids must stay in school and that they will be assets to society. Now think about this policy innovation. When the Prime Minister said this to us about 2 years ago, we all looked at him thinking, what is he saying? He said, no kid must drop out of school after O-levels. Because what happens is after O-levels, kids fail O-level. So lots of kids do other things. They become, they don't do anything. You come to my electorate in the low income areas, at 10 o'clock in the morning, there are young boys and girls loitering around. Why is that? That is because of a policy of the government that if a kid does not pass so many subjects, he or she is not allowed anymore to attend school. Now, who set those rules? Is that policy right? Is our testing scheme good enough to divide kids into, who should be going to school and who shouldn't be going to school? Is it only maths and science that make you a man or a woman or make you successful in life? So we took a decision that no longer, from this year, from next year, will any kid drop out of school after O-level, because there is nothing called failing O-levels anymore. Right? Now, these types of policy innovations or changes in policy that has been there since 1948 or before that. We had a Minister of Education, Ganangere, was before the independence. So after so many years, we have suddenly changed these. But it would have been nice if we had, some sort of lab that we could have reached out to and said, look, could you give us some sort of outcomes? Could you give us the costs and benefits? Could you give us some sort of impact of something like this? But we don't have that. So in that sense, I think it is amazing that if it is at all possible to put a group of brains together and start creating this thought process, creating this lab, virtual lab, if it may, to tell us about the different outcomes, the multiple outcomes that one may have. Then the other example I want to bring out is in terms of public service delivery. Now, this country does not have an ambulance service. This country has pretty decent healthcare numbers. UNDP tells us that we have very high human development indices and all of that, and our primary healthcare is damn good, right? If you get to a hospital, you will live, right? But getting to a hospital is a problem. Sometimes you may get a heart attack, and then you may put the person in a three-wheeler, and the three-wheeler will get stuck in traffic, and you will die. Or else you may fall off a jack tree, and you may have injured your spine. You will turn him in 3 different directions to shove him in the three-wheeler, and you will kill him, right? But this happens all the time, right? So, but nobody ever thought, look, there is a big vacuum here. Now, how do we fix this problem, right? Can we think of private ambulance service? Well, somebody might say, well, that's a public good. Public goods must be provided for by the state. Of course, there are so many arguments what a public good is, non-exclusivity, and all that. But if it is possible to come up with a public-private partnership so that you can transport people with heart attacks or brain aneurysms or strokes or accidents to hospitals, now that's an interesting policy innovation. Now we are stuck. How do we move this forward? What is the best public-private partnership for an ambulance? Now here is another challenge. I'm throwing out challenges for your new lab, right? First one was a fertilizer subsidy. Second one is come up with a public-private partnership model for the ambulance service. Now, the ambulance service that will start at the end of June in 2 provinces, the west and the south, with 89 ambulances, with fully equipped ambulances with emergency medical technicians in them, need to be sustained over a long period of time. Now, if you look at the data, it cost about $750 for one dispatch in the US, 911. One call costs about $750. Now, this we can do it for about $15. So now you look at a new paradigm. Now in this paradigm, $15, how do we make it sustainable without burdening the government? Now, will the person who survives say, I don't mind paying this money? I think so. Or will the person's family say, we don't mind paying twice that amount? I think so. But how do you sort of that behavior, right? That is what labs do, right? Look at the data, see how people respond to situations like this and come up with a plan, right? So these are practical examples that I, as a member of the government, face. Now, how do you solve these things? And the solving these things usually is ad hoc. Let's do this. People in the Department of National Planning would know. People who've been in this business for a long time, and I know many of them are here, would know to what extent we actually test this out and have a sort of a evidence-based decision-making process. You know, because without evidence, the decisions can be right, be wrong most of the time. So while I feel this whole foresighting is a bit of a cop-out in that sense, sorry, I didn't mean it in a bad way, because saying, no, you can have multiple outcomes, right? So what is the probability of outcome 1, probability of outcome 2, and probability of outcome 3? That also must be said, because otherwise it's just saying, you have a vector of outcomes and anything can fire, and if they happen, then we win, right? So I'm just being critical. So I know, so those are the little things that I want to share with you, that from a practical sense, that governments on a daily basis make decisions. I'll just give you one last how it happens, and I'll shut up. For instance, we have cabinet committee meetings, some of you all who participate in these things, or cabinet meeting. So there are 60 different things to decide on. So you have 60 different things to decide on. What is the basis that you decide? Now, in many countries that are doing well, or in most countries that are doing well, or in all countries perhaps doing well, politicians keep out of decision making. Decision making beyond policy, right? The politicians make policy, but sort of the decisions on technical grounds are made by experts, people who know. But in Sri Lanka, unfortunately, this whole process has become politicized. The politician, the minister, wants to be part of the decision. Now, I say so, therefore you do. Who the hell are you? I am the minister, so you do it. So, if we are serious about this, right? I'm telling you as a politician, I'm telling you as a member of this government, the Prime Minister is serious about this. That is why he was here. He's serious about making sure that we have the right resources put together to achieve our dream. So you had identified opportunities for you to engage with the government of Sri Lanka, and those opportunities are wide open for you. So I myself now gave you at least 2 major pieces of homework for you to work on, and there will be many others. And I thank you once again for inviting me today on behalf of the government of Sri Lanka. I thank the UNDP. I thank all the sponsors, Manchi and others. I thank all the participants, the resource persons from overseas. and I thank everyone, and I hope this is not going to stop today, and I hope this is the beginning for the long journey ahead. Thank you very much.